Welcome back, everyone, as we recognize Black History Month with AAMFT's last webinar for the month. I'm your host and moderator, Dr. Camille LaFleur. Thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to participate in Are You Lost in the Shadows? A panel discussion. Our panelists for today include Robert M. Cunningham Jr., Mrs. Barbara Dunn, and myself. Robert is the founder of RM Cunningham Consulting, LLC, a mental health private practice in Salina, Kansas. And Ms. Barbara is the co-chair of the Woodson Home Committee supporting the restoration of the Carter G. Woodson Historic Site, the Asala National Heritage Sites Research Committee, managing a master cooperative agreement between Asala and the National Park Service, and the professional development team for a newly released textbook entitled Black History 365, dedicated to Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. Before we jump into our panel discussion, we're excited that Barbara will be giving us a brief presentation on the history of Black History Month and the father of it all, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Ms. Barbara?
Good evening, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here with you today. I am excited about sharing about the father of Black history and what he means to all of us. There are lots of people that don't know who he is. And I'm going to start off because the way I learned about Dr. Woodson was through my parents. These are my parents, Novella and Vernon Spencer, and they taught me about Dr. Woodson. Why? Because one day I was walking past my dad's bookshelf, and there on the bookshelf was a book entitled The Miseducation of the Negro. The title struck me, and I said to my dad, "What is that about, Dad?" And he said, "I want you to read the book and then ask any questions you have." What struck me, you guys, because I want to tell you about Dr. Woodson, his point of reference, but I want all of you to be thinking about your personal point of reference, because it's our points of reference that gives us our beliefs, our values. It's how we operate in life. So once I read the book, what I noticed, because my father was a pastor for 36 years and my mom a strong Christian who lived what she talked about, I recognized all of the sprinklings of scripture throughout his book, which made me recognize that he was probably a Christian too. So my parents gave me a great background, and here is Dr. Woodson. Dr. Woodson has impacted communities around the world. His family and personal points of reference also created who he was. These are several pictures, and when you talk about Dr. Woodson, I want you to not only say he's the father of Black history, but add that he is a pioneer of multiculturalism, because he and pluralists of his time started the foundation that led to the era of multiculturalism. These are some of the highlights that really made Dr. Woodson who he was. He learned important lessons from his parents. His mom was a Christian. She taught him Christian values. His dad was a hard worker, but he believed in who he was. And he's taught his children to never take insults and always fight for your humanity. He wanted them to know who they were. No matter how poor they were, they had a sense of self. These were the personal points of reference I want you to think about, because my place of birth had a lot to do with me, just as what Dr. Woodson. Your early recollections of how you think about yourself. Do you think badly of your skin color? Do you think negatively about your hair? Where did all of that come from? And your personal points of reference, your neighborhood, your orientation family gives you your value system. That's exactly what was true of Dr. Woodson. So as a Christian, I always like to use this verse: God has made of one blood all people of the earth. But guess what? My dad taught me about meeting people where they were. Everybody is not a Christian, but you still have to reach people. So this next statement is my meeting people where they are statement that says the same thing that scripture says. Civilization started in Africa. We are sisters and brothers. There is one race, the human race, with thousands of cultures. And that is what Dr. Woodson taught us. I want you to watch this quick video.
Can you tell which of these children was not born free? Can you tell which of these children was not born equal? Can you tell which of these children does not deserve to be treated with dignity? We can't either. Human right number one. We are all born free and equal.
Yes, we are all born free and equal. And that is really the crux behind everything Carter G. Woodson was about. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to stop the share for a moment so I can make sure I get back to the proper place on my PowerPoint. Okay. Carter G. Woodson was a man who knew who he was. In his childhood, when he realized that people were saying that we had no history, he decided to do something about that. He decided to start an organization. That is the reason why we celebrate Black History today. So it started out a week, then a month. But let me tell you about the week. When Black History was started in 1926, Dr. Woodson's goal was that we would study the history for the week. They would introduce a theme, and then you would study that theme for the entire year. It was never meant for you to only study for the week. And why did he choose the week? Well, in 1926, symbolism was important. So what did Dr. Woodson do? He chose the week between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthday. And why did he do that? Because both of them had had significant impact on us as a people. When it changed to the month, Dr. Woodson had already transitioned. He was born in 1950. And it changed to the month in 1976. And why was it able to do that? Because Dr. Woodson started an organization that has outlived him. He started the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And that organization in 1976 went to the President of the United States at the time, President Ford, and they talked to him about presidents from that point on given a proclamation to announce the theme along with a sala. And that has been done ever since 1976. But it's because of Dr. Woodson's mentoring model, his thought about succession planning, that this organization has lived on 108 years. So I want you to think about this. Do we ever think about the trauma that we all suffer because this country was founded on the principle of human beings being enslaved? A country that had its beginnings half slave, half free, seeing one group of people as inferior because of the color of their skin. I'm going to recognize 4 significant events as I talk about the impact that Carter G. Woodson has had on all of us as the founder of Black History Month. This year marks the 205th anniversary of Frederick Douglass's birth, the 90th anniversary of Dr. Woodson's seminal work, and I'm going to be quoting a lot of his quotes from The Miseducation of the Negro, 90 years, you guys. The 55th year after the tragic assassination of Dr. King, and the 50th anniversary of Tony Brown's interview with John Henry Clark. Many of you don't know Dr. Clark, but he went back and forth to Africa a lot of times. He also attended many of the ASALA conferences. And when I say ASALA, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History was what the organization was founded. But in the 60s, they changed the name to African American Life and History and is now called ASALA. John Henry Clark attended many of those meetings, and he personally knew Carter G. Woodson. Let's look at what your organization believes about family, because Dr. Woodson, one of the 5 things he's told us always to do in the Journal of Negro History, which he founded in 1916, and that is the most complete journal about and by African Americans in the entire world, and it still exists today. He said, always study your family history. Research your family history, write it down, and get it documented so those coming after you will understand the history. And I love what you think about family. You said it's the basic institution of our society. Society depends upon families to perform certain essential tasks throughout the life cycle that no other institution of our society is able to carry out as well. That is a true statement. Today, our families are in a lot of turmoil. But let's look at what Dr. Woodson said. This is right from the Miseducation of the Negro. He said, if you teach the Negro that he has accomplished as much as any other race, he will aspire to equality and justice without regard to race. So in Dr. Frederick Douglass's time, there was a transformation happening. And when slavery ended, a lot of things changed. But guess what? The enemy still existed. This transformation in turn had the marvelous effect of changing the face of the enemy. The enemy of the Negro faced in the life of Frederick Douglass in the early to late 1800s, in the life of Dr. Woodson in the late 1800s, and in the life of Dr. King was the same. The enemy became not the individual, but the system that was allowed to exist and oppress people. Dr. King once said, and I quote, "We must be concerned not merely about who murdered the 4 little girls at 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963, when a bomb was set at the church and killed the girls, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers." So when we think about our family today, we have to think about, why are things still moving in that direction? So I want to give you 2 definitions that I want you to think about as I talk about the association and why it's so important to us today. Slave, someone who gives up their freedom willingly. Enslaved, your freedom is taken away by force. So then, what were our ancestors? Our ancestors were enslaved. And I'm going to give you a modern day concept. Today, we are choosing to be slaves to modern day slave masters, such as alcohol and other drugs, premarital sexual activity, our cell phones, video games, money, racism, you fill in the blank. And if you have become a slave to any of those things, as we walk this presentation and talk to you about how important it is to know your history, I want you to think about freeing yourself from a slave to those things. Dr. King once said, and I love this quote, because believers in the society and in families are so important. But what did I say in the beginning? We have to know how to meet people where they were. Dr. King said, if you have faith, the believer cannot be restrained. He betrays himself. He breaks out. He confesses and teaches this gospel to people at the risk of his own life. When you look at Carter G. Woodson, a man who sacrificed his life, he decided not to get married, not to have children. Why? He said because his wife would be without a husband. His children would be without a father, because he was putting his time and energy and sacrifice into helping his people know who they were through the knowledge of their history. And he was a man of integrity. What is integrity? Doing the right thing even when no one is looking. What is innate? You possess it at birth. For example, everyone was born with the innate ability to know right from wrong. So we all have the ability to know right from wrong. So my parents, as I said, introduced me to Carter G. Woodson. Then my friend Iantha Gant Wright introduced me to Asala. Now, what's the difference? All my life, since 11 years old, I knew about Carter G. Woodson, but I had no idea that an organization was formed by him. And then one day when I was working at Asala, I got a phone call. It was the pastor that took over the church when my father had died. My dad died in 1991. I started working at Asala in 2000. And I asked him, Reverend Perry, how did you know about Asala? He said, well, I'm following what your dad always did. He ordered the kit from Asala for Black History Month. So I'm ordering the kit. At that moment, I realized, all of those neat pictures and activities, the coloring books that my parents were introducing us to when we were growing up, and we were using for these great projects we're doing in school, they were coming from Asala. So now here I am. My interview with Asala, I was not looking for a full-time job. But once I found out it was Asala, she asked me, how much do we need to pay you? And what did I say? Whatever you can afford. Because I knew from that point on, I was going to be giving my life also to keeping this organization alive that is so important to us. All of this intellectual ability, people on the screen who you may not know, these are intellectuals, African Americans that help really move us to where we are. They worked with Dr. Woodson, many of them. Dr. Woodson once said, in the schools of business administration, Negroes are trained exclusively in the psychology and economics of Wall Street and are therefore made to despise the opportunities to run ice wagons, push banana carts, and sell peanuts among their own people. Now listen at this. Foreigners who have not studied economics, but have studied the Negro, take up this business and grow rich. When our families started businesses, some of us walked away from them, walked away from the land they gave us because it was not our desire to do those things they left for us. But what Dr. Woodson is saying, there is value in those businesses that our family started. And I want to share with you the importance of family, my family. Look at these pictures. In the document that I'm going to challenge you with at the end, we did a family mission statement. This is the plantation that my family was enslaved on. And they built this home. They built this home for the slave owner. They also were honored in 2018 because this is the most complete antebellum history of any slave plantation in the entire state of Texas. But this marker honors those enslaved rather than the enslaver because of the great work that they did in the community. My great-grandfather started the first school and church in Anadarko, Texas, and he donated the land. Why? Because those small businesses that they had, when they were enslaved, they had a business and they were selling their fruit and vegetables and keeping the money. So when slavery ended in 1865, they actually had money to buy land. My grandmom, this is the school that they went to. That's the school I was telling you that he donated the land for. And this is all of the inside of the plantation because we got a chance in 2018 to visit it. And why am I showing you this about my family? Because I want you to think the same thing about your family and how important it is the work you do as therapy for our families that need that level of help. But we have to help our families understand the importance of taking the help that's available to them. So let's look at, again, what Dr. Woodson did to start this organization. 1926, he conceived Negro History Week. Dr. Woodson also started the association in 1915, the Journal of Negro History in 1916. He started the Associated Publishers in 1921. Why? Because at that time, nobody was publishing the truth about our history. That was Dr. Woodson's goal. He institutionalized the study of our history when he started Negro History Week and Asala. So 1921, Associated Publishers. 1922, he bought the house in Washington, D.C. that he lived in from 1922 to 1950 when he died. And all of this work was done in that home. 1937, he started the Negro History Bulletin, which is now called the Black History Bulletin. And in 1976, as I told you, the organization he started outlived him, and they expanded the week to the month. And that was during the bicentennial of this country. Dr. Woodson once said, the mere imparting of information is not education. The effort must result in making a man think and do for himself. That is one of my favorite quotes. And today, as you listen to this presentation, if it doesn't educate you, you merely just heard the conversation. You weren't really listening to gain something from it. So you want to really, this should make you think about something that you're going to do differently as it relates to your history and pass it on to your family. ASALA's mission is to promote, research, preserve, interpret, and disseminate information about Black life, history, and culture to the global community. Its vision is to be the premier Black heritage learned society with a strong network of national and international branches and partners whose diverse and inclusive membership will continue the Woodson legacy. I want you to hear a couple of these presentations by some of the well-known people of what they say about Dr. Woodson.
The notion that helping people understand who they are, helping people really have a better sense of the role they've played in shaping America. And in some ways, Woodson's really shaped the creation of this museum. Because on the one hand, like Woodson, the museum's job is to help people remember that rich history of the African American, to remember the stories they ought to know of the enslaved, of the sharecroppers, of the families that left the South for the Gulf. But also, much like what Woodson wanted, which people sometimes forget, is Woodson also felt it was crucial for African American history to be known by non-Africans. And that for me, creating the museum also using African American culture as a lens to understand what it meant to me. To say that in some ways, America's identity has been profoundly shaped by the African American experience. So it's not a story about young people. Gene Woodson.
All of these people thought a lot about Dr. Woodson. And one of the things I want you to know as I'm closing, I want you to know that February was chosen by Dr. Woodson, not because it was the shortest month of the year. We talked about that. He chose it because he chose the birthdays between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. And he wants you to study the history as we present a theme every year. This year's theme, Black resistance. Black resistance. If you go on the ASALH's website, www.asalh.org, you will see all of the themes that have been since 1926. But this year, it's a very appropriate theme. We have branches across the United States. He's mentored so many people that you will know about. And the Journal of African American History that now exists just mentored in a younger man, Dr. Pero Dagbowie, who's only in his 40s, who is now the editor of the journal. It has many benefits to be a part of ASALH, and you will find those benefits on the website. And as we have said throughout the years, self-determination was a goal of Dr. Woodson and our people today. And self-determination is the right of a people to choose their own destiny. ASALH and Dr. Woodson have impacted the world significantly. Dr. Woodson always talked about not only our history here in the United States, but he wanted you to study your history from civilization in Africa and tie it all together here. That is the life of Dr. Woodson. That is how he has impacted us as a people, and that is how he has impacted the world. And all over the world, even today, people are celebrating Black History Month in other countries, on other continents. Why? Because Dr. Woodson traveled the world to let us know and let our people know that we are still, even though we're here in America, we are Africans descended from America, and we brought our skills and abilities here to the United States and help make this country what it is today. Study Dr. Woodson, and I want you to do this. You are going to be challenged to study your family history, but what you want to remember, our history did not start here. We were stolen from Africa and brought here, but there is no excuse not to know your history. Why? Because of this organization that Dr. Woodson founded in 1915. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barbara. I appreciate the challenges around knowing our history and knowing ourselves. As a therapist, I was thinking about all of the work that I do with families to help them really understand who they are and understand what their values are, understand who they are and where they came from, and to help them have a voice in creating the family relationships that they're actually wanting. And so a lot of what you shared about Dr. Woodson and that information and your experiences around that are just so powerful in families, especially today. So let's get kind of started in inviting Robert in to have this conversation with us as well. So just kind of starting off, I want to kind of orient us to this discussion. And in your presentation, Ms. Barbara, you had the piece in there that talked about knowing like your place of birth, the environment you've been in, early recollections that you've had of experiences, and really kind of knowing who you are from that. So I'd like you, Ms. Barbara, to kind of start and talk about the experience around history of Black people and our experiences here, as well as the history of your family, and what impact can you identify that that has had on the knowledge of who you are and how it has shaped who you are?
That's a great question, because everything that I am, Camille, is because of my upbringing in childhood. My mom and dad always talked about our ancestors, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, because unfortunately, all of my grandparents had already passed when we were born. My mom was the youngest of 11 children, but she was born when her mother was 45. So she was much, much younger. And then she didn't have children till she was 30. So our first cousins are all in their 90s. Our second cousins are more our age. So it really made a difference that they told us the stories and they planted the seeds of the names. So when we found out about the plantation in Anadarko, we were able to connect the dots. Why? Because our parents shared with us our rich history all along. And my dad was a scholar. He used to read the almanac and study lynchings. I remember all of that. And he was really a scholar and a pastor. So he was a biblical scholar and a historical scholar. And so I picked up on all of that. And it made such a difference in my life. It made such a difference even in the way I interacted in life. And the one thing I want to share with you is that our parents didn't let us go. I had two sisters, and they didn't let us go downtown until we were 16 years old. And I didn't understand that until I was 30. They were protecting us from what was going on in that tumultuous era growing up in the 50s and 60s. My mother used to buy our clothes and bring them home. I didn't know that we couldn't try on clothes. We had to sit in the balcony in the theater rather than downstairs. I didn't know that. I never saw a black and white only water fountain. They kept us from that. And it was a good sheltering. Why? Because they were building up in us the knowledge of who we were, so we felt good about our hair, our skin color, nothing, so when I finally had an incident that was negative, it did not bother me. Why? Because my mother always said to us, if you know you haven't done anything to cause someone to act negatively towards you, don't take it personal. Take it as an opportunity to teach. So the first time I was called the N-word, I said to the lady, ma'am, if I were you, the next time you see someone that looks like me, I wouldn't call them that word, because we don't like that word, and the next person might not do what I'm doing. I was showing love because I knew she had a problem. I knew I did not. And that's the power of knowing who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that word, it's the power of knowing who you are. Even in you sharing, I can remember my mom sharing similar experiences. I grew up in Topeka, Kansas, which is known really home of the Brown versus the Board of Education. And so my mom actually experienced integrating schools, and she would share stories about experiences that they've had. And one thing that always kind of stuck out to me is that she wasn't impacted by, well, let me say it this way. Her reaction to things that were racially negative was one of, that's their issue. Like, she always knew who she was. And I think there was so much power in being raised in all Black spaces that really helped you see yourself and understand who you are. And so much of who I am, I can understand now looking back, maybe not so much when I was younger. I don't want to be like my mom, but older, I can look back and see so much of that training and that experience and teaching me who I am and how to show up in spaces and be proud of who I am. That is so powerful. Robert, you want to share kind of around your experience?
It's interesting because we spoke about this, a few days ago, your experience, your meaning, Mrs. Dunn, as well as yourself, and then my lack of that foundation of understanding history, and seeing that it's not on me that this is an issue, but it's in the system as Mrs. Dunn was speaking about. I think it's phenomenal, and I think and I wrote down the power of knowing who you are, ! And how that benefits one, and this just wasn't part of, as I said before, Christianity was my bring up, this way I was raised, but not with that other foundation, which I think is equally important as that, just knowing who you are. I just hearing you, I'm getting excited just by knowing the richness of what you guys had coming up.
Mm-hmm. Robert, can you talk a little bit about how that shows up in your practice?
Yeah, so now it shows up. I believe early on in my practice, I did consider, because I'm in a city where it's 4% African American, right? So most of my clients do not mirror me. And I was concerned, like, well, what will they think? Will they look at me as if somebody's less than? But that was something intrinsic, and that was a projection that I put on others. But the way it's impacted me, I found out that when people want support, they will get support from whomever they feel connected with, right? And I think, though, I haven't experienced anyone that has come in that have chosen to come see me that any type of bigotry in that regard, because they have the choice to come and they choose to see me. So I haven't witnessed that with regards to what you're asking.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking about history. For me, a lot, I grew up and was educated through predominantly white institutions from kindergarten all through college. And I think about how I have always kind of supplemented my learning with my own kind of learning. Being in the library at 16, I came across the Black Panthers and learned about the Black Power movement, which was nothing we talked about in school. And so when I think about my training as a therapist, I also came into this field of MFT, supplementing what I was learning in school with works from Dr. Naeem Akbar, and the ways in which he was talking about the Black experience from a psychological standpoint in ways that I hadn't heard, I wasn't hearing in my program even. And so in my practice, I can see how I utilize some of that information where people are blaming themselves for not being able to get things together. I offer information about systems and the impact of our history, and really kind of challenge clients to think about the impact that has played in who they've become, and even the role that plays in who they think they should be, and really kind of help them break down or get to what they're wanting, separate from what they've been told they should be doing or how they should be living. Yeah, so we kind of talked about the importance of knowing yourself, and the role that information plays in that. Dr. Woodson, Carter G. Woodson, has a quote that talks about the lack of confidence of the Negro in himself, and I made it too small, and I will start it over. The lack of confidence of the Negro in himself and in his possibilities is what has kept him down. His miseducation has been a perfect success in this respect. So we've kind of been discussing how education and our experiences have played a role in us knowing who we are. But I want to kind of talk about blind spots. So can you talk about how knowing who you are and knowing your history has really helped you avoid getting lost in the shadows, if you will?
So you want me to start?
Sure, Barbara.
Yes.
Thank you.
You know what? I really like that question because I'm going to put a twist on this. I think about when you talk about blind spots, I think about the culture that saw us as less than. And I want to talk about their blind spot. Why? Because in our community, the teachers, when they went to school, they would go and get PhDs in math and science. And guess what? They could only teach us. So there we were getting educated by PhDs in math and science. We were getting a better education because of the blind spot that the other culture had, thinking they were keeping these great people away from their children.
Oh,
And
wow.
I really believe, and I think about it, after a while, they started to see that. Because when we integrated, and I was in 1 year of integration, my senior year was when we integrated. And when we went to those schools, we were able to compete at the highest level. In fact, most of us had all of our credits and really just needed English to graduate. And I think about blind spots. That was a blind spot for the other culture because they really did not get it. They were keeping us away from their children, is what they thought, but they were also not engaged in this rich cultural, intellectual community that had so much to share and give to them. And now I think about the blind spots that we see in our society today, because now, as I know, the plantation where my family came from, we have done DNA and we are related to our enslavers.
Mm.
So there is a lot, and that's why I say we have to start seeing ourselves as the human race. We have to get rid of this colorism thing because it was really a social construct put together to keep a lie perpetuated that we were less than human. So that's truly a blind spot for the other culture.
Okay, yeah. What about you, Robert? In our work, blind spots can be very problematic or challenging. We talk about the role for you.
Yeah, and I always have to go to like the definition of before, because when you asked me that, I started thinking about a lot. So I'm going to read the definition really quick. A bias, so a blind spot bias is a cognitive bias that fails to recognize the impact on one's own judgment, while at the same time noticing the impact of bias on judgments made by others. The example that it said is people often consider their personal opinions to be staunchly objective and factual as opposed to those who think or feel otherwise. As a therapist, I believe that our role is to help people see that maybe your conclusion is not the correct one. Because when we look at, I have a saying that you are not a problem to fix, but a beautiful monument just waiting to be completed. And so if their blindness is, I am an issue, I am a problem, it's very difficult to move them from, or to help, let me say, because I don't move them, we just give them opportunities to move, right? Mm-hmm. It's very difficult for me to help shift them if they start off from a place of, I'm less than, I'm nothing. And I think my job is to clear that away and to share that, is there a way for you to look at this differently? And that's when I do go into systems work and say, well, have you thought about what is happening, whether it be at your job, have you thought about how you were raised? Have you thought about some of the misconceptions or the perceived truths that you have with regards to this issue? And I try my best not to say problem, and that right there. And when I do that, it's to shift them from a place of, okay, well, if I look at this from other rings, and I call it rings, right, to help them see the system view. You have a ring of your family, you have a ring of your pain, you have a ring of other people's pain, push on you. And so once I can get them to see those rings of the issue, then all of a sudden I believe enlightenment comes for them, and then they're able to shift from a place of where they are. And I hope that helps.
Yeah. I appreciate, even if I think about Ms. Barbara kind of talked from a standpoint of the majority having a blind spot in the ways in which systems have been created. And then you talked about kind of your work with other people to help them beyond their blind spots. And I would just add that as a therapist, and also I'm a professor, so a lot of the work that I do in my teaching and in my supervision is around people knowing themselves. We think person of the therapist, really being honest and aware of what you're believing and what you value, and recognizing the ways in which that shows up. I guess the longer I practice, the more important I see that piece being. We can learn theory, we understand common factors, but really being honest with what you believe and how that shows up in the room, how that impacts the questions that you ask, how that impacts the things that you explore. Our society is a busy society. So you have work and then families and children and sports and all kinds of things. And so finding time, making it important to be able to carve out time to sit with, what are you believing? What are you feeling? Especially in our world with so much happening. Yes. There are lots of opinions. And so I think our responsibility as clinicians, our responsibility as people in this society and in this world is to really take time to pay attention to who we are, so that those blind spots are more lit, so that we can see them. I'll use the bad word of woke. When we're woke, you're able to see things. And when you can see things, then you have more awareness of how you're putting that on other people.
Right.
One thing, so I am the chair of Margins to Center for AAMFT's Topical Interest Network. And I remember when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to call this Topical Interest Network, or this TIN, and someone offered Margins to Center. And so if you know Bell Hook's work, Bell Hook's, her book From Margin to the Center really addresses Black women and how Black women exist on the margins, and how their lives have really kind of been hidden from mainstream society. And I think that there are ways in which not only African Americans, but marginalized groups have been in the margins. So Carter G. Woodson has this quote: "We should emphasize not Negro history, but the Negro in history." And so I was thinking about that centering, and not separating, but centering ourselves in that history. And so, Ms. Barbara, can you talk a little bit about the role in the ways in which history and relationships that you've had have played a process in you being able to center yourself in that experience?
Yeah, and you know what, that is really a good question, because we really should really focus now on purpose, because what I realized that my whole life has been leaning towards the purpose that God created me for. Knowing about Dr. Woodson at 11 years old, and in my community, I was like the community teacher. I had a little school where I would teach the 4 and 5 and 6 year olds how to read. I was literally teaching them with phonics, because I loved to read. We couldn't get go to the library, and I didn't know that. I thought we were privileged that the bookmobile was coming to our neighborhood. So our parents, and I didn't realize that until 2005 when I was watching Rosa Parks. But the relational growth and pattern in my life had everything to do with what my parents gave me and me leaning towards my purpose as I was figuring it out along the way. And then I realized I'm an orthodox teacher. I didn't go into teaching, but I am a teacher. Everything I'm doing is teacher. I mentor, I develop training, and I teach schools how to reach our children. And so when you look at that whole relationship between the knowledge of your history and the relationships that you build along the way, history was having everything to do with my life. The pattern of my life had to do with me knowing something about who I was. So I really am so excited, because when Dr. Woodson said that, you know, that he believed that psychological health of our people depended on us knowing who we were. And I truly believe him. I totally agree with him.
Yeah, some of what you speak to is really our community, even in the way that you've lived. You talk about your purpose in being able to teach and having a passion for that and understanding. So it's not just that you learn the information for yourself, but that you also shared that information. And then the piece that us being a collective culture is that our village continues to share that information, and that power just spreads. Yeah. What about for you, Robert?
So give me the question again so that I can make sure that I'm focused on.
Well, so the quote was about, not just emphasizing the Negro in history, but or Negro history, but the Negro in history. And so really kind of talking about being able to center yourself. You could even answer that from a standpoint of how are you centering voices of those who are marginalized in the therapy that you provide?
Right. So I'm as I spoke up last time, I'm male and I'm a Christian, which in regards that's privilege, right? And so I call, and any marriage and family therapist that may be viewing, we know, how when you catch a client in an untruth, so they tell you something one week and then they share something about the same story the next week, and you realize that there was a lie that was spoken. So, well, I'm a directive therapist, so I call them out, and just so happened to be a female client, and I shared with her. I said, why were you dishonest about what you shared, right? And I think, and she said to me, I felt dumb. And I asked myself, did I project that? And I was concerned that I projected something in what I did and maybe how I looked and what I said that made her feel that way. So I was asking questions. I said, I want to make sure that, in our past, did I say anything? Have I done anything to make you feel like you were dumb? And she said no. And I said, well, if you can't be honest with me in this space, it's going to be very difficult for us to move. And so I was concerned about my presence in that space. I was concerned about what she projected upon me or what she saw in me. I was concerned because we are systemic, and I did not want my power, I did not want my privilege to interrupt health, and healthy choices. And so I think for me, I'm knowing who I am has given me, I believe, and I don't know all. So some of even the books that you're sharing, I'm sitting here writing these authors down, right? So that I can go back and educate myself. But I think knowing who I am has allowed me, and also knowing what we went through allows me to be more sensitive to someone where they are, and to make sure that I'm not, my voice alone sometimes intimidates people. And so softening my voice helps with that, maybe leaning back in my chair because I'm at the edge of my seat wanting to know what everybody's saying. That helps with that. So, yeah, I think realizing that I felt small in spaces with some of my experiences, and so I use praise a lot to make people feel like they are welcomed, in the space to where I'm serving them. So
Yeah, Robert. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Robert.
Camille, to add to that, when we talk about the Negro in history, that is why the whole lie that was told to portray us as inferior is so important, because what Dr. Woodson really wanted us to understand that we are history makers and we're a part of this. We're a part of the American story. African-American history is American history. And so it's not separate and apart, but why do we celebrate in February? And even if everybody started teaching our history, we're still going to have the celebration in February. Why? Because we need to recognize the value of all that our people have brought to make this country what it is. So we are in the history, the bigger picture of history, and we still are in our culture. That's why it's important for us to see the difference in the human race, which is all of us, and then all the different cultural differences. Those differences are what make us great.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, sorry. I was thinking about how in February it's Black History Month, and for me, I always talk about, like, today's the 23rd, so I'd say this is day 23 of 365, because I just go harder and I try to find new ways, new information to learn about the Black experience here. Us before we came here, I've really focused a lot there. And so that Black history and learning both is me learning about me. And so that continues throughout the year. I did want to kind of circle back because, Robert, last week you shared that you're a newer therapist still. How long have you been practicing?
I've been practicing since, let's see, 2019.
19. See, so, okay. So you've just still recently been licensed?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how, that awareness that you just talked about I like that you shared your session with a female client and the experience that she had, and kind of your awareness of your privilege as a male in the room. Can you talk about what has helped you recognize those pieces and continue to learn as you continue to grow into your role as a therapist?
Yes. So I think that one of the main things that has helped me is surrounding myself with people who are wiser and brighter than I am. Right. And that share, that are not male, and that because they allow me to see things that I'm not aware of. I believe that any therapist that feel like they've reached a mark where they're able to see everything, I believe that's a lying therapist, right? And so I surround myself with people to give me different perspectives, to challenge my own beliefs. And I get mad too when I think I may have told you this early on. I get mad when people disagree with me, or share another perspective. But I put myself in the space so that I can change, so that so that I won't be arrogant, and that I won't let my belief that I know certain things project that on the people that are in the room, right? Me being male, this so happened to be someone who's been very honest, very transparent with me in the room, and I have seen growth in this individual. So I think there was something in her that didn't want to disappoint me, and that was too much power that she gave me, right? I'm not the judge of your success or your failure. I'm here walking with you to carry you through. So I realized I'm sweating over here because
sorry.
I have my heat on 80 and I should have turned it down. So
I thought I had you in the hot seat. So sorry.
So you do have me in the hot seat. Yeah, you do have me in the hot seat. But I realized too that I do come off, some people have said, not arrogant, but confident. And sometimes I got to draw that back. Sometimes I got to make sure that I'm holding space. And I asked a lot of questions. So in the room, because I have my own real strong beliefs and truths and values, I can't project really any of that on the person that comes in. So I'm very conscious of, being a learner and not a prescriber of my truth upon them.
Mhm.
Because I can believe like I believe all day long, but that it is not for me in that room to project that upon anyone. Now, when I am sitting with people who share our own culture, there's some ways that there's some freedoms in that, right? Where we can bounce off of each other, but maintaining professionalism, maintaining ethics, right? But there are some things I can say to, let's just say, for instance, if we were in the room, I could say some things to you that I could not say to another group because it just wouldn't make sense. So I hope that helps answer.
For sure. And I was thinking about the theme in our conversation today, as a lot of the answers that have been shared have really still talked about how to illuminate blind spots so that they're not
Right.
there. Even
Right.
things that you just shared are ways in which that you continue to gain this awareness and make space. You kind of talked about a therapist that gets to the point where they know everything. And I've been practicing or been a therapist practicing over 20 years now.
Right.
And I don't know if it's practicing as a therapist or just getting older, but the older I get, the more I recognize I'm never going to know everything. And so
Right.
that has heightened my curiosity. And so in spaces that have marginalized voices, I am listening and I am curious and I am learning from them in those spaces as a way to really make space and illuminate their voice and to make sure that I'm not taking over in those situations.
Because it's easy to. And I did come in thinking that I was going to be the hero of people's lives until a professor knocked me off of my high horse and said, "You're not the hero." The people coming in, sharing life with you, exposing themselves, making themselves bare, they're the heroes. You just have the opportunity to have information to help them see themselves more. So don't think that your knowledge is not power in that space, because then you're using that abusively, I think. So
Absolutely.
So you know what, Camille, that really makes me think about something my dad said to me. He said, as long as you're living, you are learning. When you stop learning, you have stopped living. Even if you're walking around, you're a dead man walking. And so that is so powerful what you just said, because for as long as we live, we'll be learning. And Robert, I really like what you said. You know what, as a Christian, Jesus is a counselor. And so we get the Bible and we can teach from that. But if you are a Christian and don't have the ability to meet people where they
are,
you're no good to anybody. And that's one of the biggest things that we have to do. Sometimes before people can even hear you, you might have to buy them a sandwich.
Yep. Meet the need.
Meet the need.
Well, I've enjoyed our discussion today. And I thank you all for joining us this afternoon to explore these topics. As a reminder, the session code for today's webinar is 52952. Please use this code to access the evaluation form. Just a reminder that it's not too late to register for the Leadership Symposium that AMFT will be hosting live in New Orleans on March 9th through the 11th. It is an excellent opportunity to meet people who can influence your career and provide connections to propel you towards your next step. The Leadership Symposium is designed to nurture leadership skills and development in marriage and family therapists who are passionate about advancing the profession and their impact on that. I look forward to the symposium. This will be my first time attending, and I was excited because I saw that there is a community service project. And I love the idea of MFTs really being active in changing systems. And one way to do that is for us to be active in the community. So if you attend, please come up. I look forward to meeting new people. So, but if you have more questions about the Leadership Symposium, please visit the website or email events@AAMFT.org. I'd just like, before we leave, to leave us with this quote from Dr. Woodson. Let truth destroy the dividing prejudices of nationality and teach universal love without distinction of race, merit, or rank. Until next time, we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you.